On today's episode, we tackle a pretty wide variety of topics from $99 combos and buzzbaits for smallmouth to glide bait colors and side imaging as we peek into the final mailbag episode of the year, powered by Dakota Lithium. All that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Welcome to the Tackle Talk Podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk Podcast. As always, we are brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. And right now, American Legacy Fishing is smack dab in the middle of their 12 days of Christmas sales, where they have some unbelievable sales over on the website for you all that you can take advantage of now through Christmas Day. So some of those deals include 40% off all Power Pro braid, 20% off Bubba scales, 25% off mooch minnows and freeloaders, 30% off all 6 cents baits, buy one get one free Veritas rods, 25% off Clutch Eco swim baits, 25% off Robo Worm, 25% off Yamamoto, 25% off missile baits, 25% off Z-Man, and more over on the website right now through Christmas Day. Don't miss out on these sales because once Christmas Day comes and goes, these sales will be gone and you will miss out on anywhere from 20 to 40% off your favorite brands right now at American Legacy Fishing. This is one of the 10,000 reasons why I love ALF. They do great sales. They have the best customer service and some of the fastest shipping in all of the fishing industry, and you feel good about supporting them because they're a great mom and pop shop right here in the Midwest that actually wants to take care of you. So head over to www.americanlegacyfishing.com and again, check out some of those sales. Power Pro, Bubba scales, mooch minnows and freeloaders, 6 cents baits, Veritas rods, Clutch Eco swim baits, Robo Worm, Yamamoto, missile baits, Z-Man, and more. And as always, if what you're looking for is not on sale, use code TACKLETALK10. That's going to save you 10% on almost everything on the website that's not already on sale. Some exclusions apply, but use that code TACKLETALK10 to try and save even more money over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. All right, everybody, today we're going to start off with a big thank you to everyone that wrote in about last week's Swimmy Awards. I appreciate all of you allowing us to do that show every year where we get to kind of take ourselves a little less seriously. We get to poke a little fun at kind of the ridiculousness of the world that is fishing over the past year. And I realize it's a far cry from our normal content. We're usually an extremely straightforward, educational, no-nonsense podcast 51 weeks out of the year. And that is our 1 week to kind of break that rule each and every year. So I'm glad you guys all enjoyed it. We got a ton of messages from like, dude, I'm crying, laughing in my car right now, to one of them said something like, I had to turn this off because I was giggling out loud at my desk at work, so I'll have to finish this later. Stuff like that. That's the fun part about the Swimmies. I do appreciate you all humoring us once a year and letting us do that. I realize it might not be for everyone because it is so different than what we normally do, but hopefully you guys all enjoyed that last week. Okay, and then next week coming up, back by popular demand, is our either 5th or 6th straight year of brand new New Year's resolutions for anglers. So I've got 5 brand new ones that we will talk about next week. Again, another one of those shows that I think everybody really looks forward to every year. So get ready. That's coming at you next week for our very, very last show of the year. Okay, next, let's jump into some news here. Before we get into an actual news story, there is some news that we're not going to cover today. And I'm sure most of you have seen or heard the news about Ben Milliken, and I'm just going to stop you right here because if you tuned in today to hear sort of like, hot takes or opinions on what's going on there with that situation, then chances are you probably don't know us too well here at Tackle Talk because that's not really what we do, right? Last week was the only week of the year where we get to kind of poke a little fun, crack some jokes, and sort of dip our toes into that side of the sport in a very lighthearted way. The other 51 weeks a year, we avoid all of the drama. We avoid rumors. All that stuff does is feed into kind of our lowest level desires as humans for gossip and sensationalism, and that's just not what we do here. So that stuff is obviously easy to put out there for easy traffic and clickbait, which is why you've seen so many other people probably do that over the past week or so, but that doesn't make you a better angler, and that's ultimately what we're here to do on this podcast. So sorry to disappoint, but I'm just not going to speak on things that we don't know the whole story about and behind the scenes speculation, because again, that gets us nowhere. And I guess I'll just leave you with this, right? Just remember that even though everybody else out there wants to be kind of the first to report on something or the first to break news or something like that for clicks, often it's smart to kind of sit there and wait for all the details to come out before forming an opinion based on second or third-hand information and rumors. So patience often leads to the truth, and I think you owe it to someone like Ben to wait for the whole truth to come out instead of trying to capitalize on it early for like selfish gain. So I'll just leave that right there. It's just not something we are going to dive into today. If you tuned in to hear that, I'm sorry. The next story we have here is from Fox 6 Milwaukee, and it is an article that says SUV falls through Puckaway Lake ice, driver escapes. So this is a really quick, couple sentences here, and then we'll talk about, again, why I'm bringing this up. So the incident happened on Puckaway Lake around 3 p.m., witnesses told Fox 6 News. The man drove the SUV onto the ice where it sat all day, and it broke through as he tried to leave. It was pulled out on Sunday. The lake ice is estimated to only be a few inches thick. As the surface refreezes in the coming weeks, it could create a hazard for anybody that wants to go out on the lake due to differing thickness at that location. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources reminds the public this time of year that no ice is safe ice. The DNR does not monitor ice conditions, but they are monitored locally. Local fishing clubs, outfitters, and bait shops are the best sources for local current ice conditions. So I dug a little deeper into the story, and it basically sounds like there was like a 62-year-old gentleman who purposefully drove out onto the ice because he thought it was thick enough. I'm assuming to ice fish. I can't confirm that, but I'm going to assume ice fishing because the story says, and other news outlets kind of confirm this, that the vehicle was on the ice the majority of the day and it only fell through as this guy was trying to leave. So other news outlets reported that there was like as little as 4 inches of ice in the location where it fell through, which is nowhere near enough to safely drive on with an SUV. Not to mention that this lake they're talking about is part of a river system, so there's actually current under the water, which we'll talk about here in a second, and again, why it adds to this story. So we're glad the gentleman was okay. His SUV obviously is not, but possessions can be replaced, lives cannot. So we are thankful that he made it out okay. And so we start with this today because it's just one of a few different stories that we've seen over the past few weeks with like early ice and some accidents. We've already had, I think, at least 2 fatalities that I've seen in terms of like local news stories that have popped up from up north. And it just kind of is a good time, I guess, probably to sit here and have a reminder of some things that you need to keep in mind if you want to go out, especially on early ice. One, as the article says, and anybody that ice fishes will also tell you, no ice is safe ice. There is safer ice, I guess, but that ER at the end of safe is doing a lot of work in that sentence because, again, no ice is completely safe. A good rule of thumb usually is like 4 inches is considered okay for ice fishing or ice skating or walking out on the ice. Again, there was like 4 inches here, so don't be driving an SUV on there. 5 to 7 inches, I think, is what they usually say is normally okay for starting to take like light vehicles out, like snowmobiles, dirt bikes, things like that. And then you got to get to like 8 to 12 inches before you can really start taking a car or a small truck on the ice or something like that. And again, those are minimums. Obviously, the more ice, the better in any of those situations. Now, can you stand on ice that's below 4 inches? Yes, sometimes depending on certain conditions. Is the ice forming or is it melting? Is there current below it? Is it snow-packed? Is it clear ice or dirty ice? How deep is the water? There are a ton of different factors that come into play that you should probably take into account before you step out on the ice. So for instance, in this case, there was current beneath because of a river system, and that drastically changes things from a stagnant pond or a lake. Moving water below the ice will often weaken that ice on top because the layer below is obviously more turbulent than like a lake or a pond or something like that. That's why you see creeks and rivers freeze last, because it's harder obviously to freeze moving water. So that's one thing you have to take into account. Again, around here, like one of the the big ice fishing lakes that we have around me in Ohio, has an actual river that comes into it from the north side, and that channel where that river comes in has notoriously weaker and sketchier ice than the rest of the lake. So we have to be extra careful whenever you're accessing or crossing right there. Little stuff like that can save a life. And then, of course, you obviously have to have the right gear, and the right gear will save your life. The right gear for warmth is obviously important, but you also have to have the right gear, heaven forbid you fall in. Get warm ice gear, but then also invest in something like a float suit. My Striker ice suit that I have that obviously keeps me as warm as possible out there. It's awesome. It also assists you in floating, heaven forbid you fall into the water. It doesn't like inflate or anything. It's not some big puffy airbag coat, anything like that. It's just made out of a material that will help you stay afloat so that you can get to safety if you do fall through. Now, the second part of that scenario is physically getting back out of the water if you fall in. And that's hard because ice is slick. Duh, right? There's nothing to grab onto if you fall into the ice. You're just going to have your hands like slipping as you try and grab some of the ice that's still intact. You can't really pull yourself out unless you have ice picks with you. And they're only like $10. You can wear them around your neck so that you have easy access to them and you can grab them really quick if you fall in, and then use those to drag yourself out of the water and pick into that ice that's still intact and just kind of pull yourself out. Those two things, a float suit and ice picks, can save your life. And I would strongly recommend looking into them if you have any sort of interest in going out on the ice, no matter the conditions. But we're obviously glad the gentleman in this story is okay. It's just a friendly reminder. Know your conditions, be safe, obey the minimum recommendations for inches of ice before you actually go out and attempt to go on it by yourself or a vehicle. And I just hope everybody has a fun, safe ice season as we get into that time of the year.
Breaking news!
Okay, next up here on the news side of things, we do have some breaking news, or at least breaking news at the time I'm recording this. Probably not completely breaking by the time this episode comes out because it'll be a few days later, but Bassmaster has announced that they are doing away with the option to sign up as a co-angler on the Bassmaster Opens in 2025. So the press release here, or the article I guess, says Bass shutters Bassmaster Opens co-angler program. The long-standing co-angler program within the Bassmaster Opens has been eliminated for the 2025 season, Bass announced today. Due to multiple reasons, including fairness to the field of boaters and reduced interest since COVID, the program has been shuttered. Co-anglers have been a staple in the Bassmaster Opens since the inception of the league. Not only did these anglers get to compete for great prizes, but they were able to learn from veteran anglers while competing. When COVID struck our nation in 2020, the number of anglers signing up to compete as co-anglers diminished due to state restrictions and general health concerns during the time. The numbers have remained low since. Last year, boaters expressed concerns that there were fairness issues if they had a co-angler and competed against a portion of the field who did not have co-anglers. Out of an abundance of caution to maintain the integrity of the sport for our Opens boaters, the elimination of co-anglers became a topic of discussion. This concern, paired with the reduction of non-boaters since 2020, led to the final decision. It was a tough call, said Hank Weldon, Bassmaster Opens tournament director, but now that we have a home for our co-anglers in the new Bass Nation qualifiers, it just makes sense. These avid anglers will still have the opportunity to compete at a high level, and our Opens pros will be able to pursue their dreams in a league that couldn't be more fair or competitive. Okay, so there you have it. No co-anglers in 2025 and seemingly beyond. And most of you probably know, but the co-angler system is basically it's somebody who signs up to fish in the boat with one of the regular boaters. So you're kind of along for the ride. You can learn a lot from your boater, but you're also only competing against other co-anglers, not the boaters themselves. So your success as a co-angler has a lot to do with who your boater is, which is obviously randomly drawn each time. But this kind of makes sense, right? Co-angler entry fees aren't much. Bass probably isn't making too much money off of them. And then in the past years, the interest has been declining on the co-angler side. And the article says that this is because of, I guess, COVID aftermath plus boater complaints, both of which might have some validity to them. But there's also probably another big reason why fewer and fewer people want to be a co-angler these days. And it's those dreaded three letters that keep popping up, FFS. Because let's be honest, when your boater is catching all of their fish in the middle of the lake, mid-strolling on live scope, and you're stuck in the back of the boat with no live sonar, it's not quite the same as the days when you were both going up and down the bank, flipping docks or weed edges, things like that. Now, of course, sometimes your boater is still fishing that way and everything works out fine, or I'm sure there are some boaters that are cool about it and let you come up and catch some fish on the live scope too so that you can do well as well. But it's just a completely different game now for boaters and co-anglers, and the co-anglers are probably getting the shaft in a lot of those situations. I mean, to be honest, that's one of the big reasons why I probably wouldn't want to sign up as a co-angler these days. I don't want to pay my entry fee and then have the chance of being stuck with some guy that's just out in the middle of the lake chasing suspended fish, and I'm stuck in the back blind casting offshore because that sounds miserable. So I'm sure that's a part of it too. But either way, it's official. Bassmaster will no longer offer a co-angler division on the Bassmaster Opens beginning in 2025. Okay, and since next week is our New Year's resolution show, and this is the last show of the year before that, I figured it would probably be good to get in one more good, solid mailbag episode before 2024 comes to an end. So with that, we are going to open up the mailbag powered by Dakota Lithium.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast mailbag, powered by Dakota Lithium Batteries. Adventure awaits at dakotalithium.com.
All right, the first question here is from Giovanni, and he says, "Hey Andrew, longtime listener, loved the show. I have a simple question. I'm in the market for a budget bait casting combo, primarily throwing moving baits like crankbaits and chatterbaits. I was looking at the Abu Garcia Jordan Lee combo at $99. What are your thoughts on this combo for the purposes listed? It's the all black one with the black camo grips. Thanks and keep doing what you do. There's no one better in the space." Well, thanks, Giovanni. I appreciate that. First off, super cool name, right? I don't think we've ever had a Giovanni write into the show before, so I like that right off the bat. But to your question, the $99 Jordan Lee combos. So you're actually talking about, again, the dark rods, not the white rods, the white Jordan Lee signature rods with like the silver and yellow reels. You're looking at the true $99 combos because there are two different kind of Jordan Lee family of rods. So it's important to obviously point that out. A lot of people saw like Jordan Lee out on the Heavy Hitters event last year, wearing fish out on a frog on his signature rods. Those rods themselves are $99. You're actually talking about the combo. So the one thing I will say is that it is borderline impossible nowadays to find a true tournament-ready bait casting combo for under $100. It is. I have talked about this with a few people over the past couple weeks. Those days have kind of come and gone. I would say now $200 is the normal new budget / entry-level tournament combo, unfortunately. And honestly, even that is kind of tough to put together a true nice combo under $200 nowadays. It's getting harder and harder by the day. So inflation has kind of smacked us all in the face over the past decade or so, and to find any good serviceable bait casting combo under $100 is a good deal. So we will start there. Now, the $99 Jordan Lee combo, I think only comes in one size. I'm pretty sure it's a 7-foot medium heavy fast, which is totally fine for chatterbaits and even for crankbaits. Now, I probably wouldn't go out and like deep crank offshore with this in 25 foot of water. Probably wouldn't do that. But if you're looking for like a regular, 10 foot or under square bill / shallow to maybe even medium diver rod, you're totally fine with this. Now, the other thing I had a hard time finding, but I think I've saw it before, where these combos usually come in a 6.5 to 1 as far as the reel that comes with them, which is a little bit slower reel, but again, that's actually right in the wheelhouse for crankbaits and chatterbaits too even. Now, it might not be the best reel for something where you need a ton of speed, like frogging or hardcore punching or something like that, but if you're just using it for chatterbaits, for moving baits, for, crankbaits, things like that, you're perfectly fine at that 6.5 to 1. So I would say the price is right, the specs are right, pull the trigger, right? Because for $99, that is a great deal for a full combo nowadays. All right, the next question here is from Brett and Holden, and they say, "Hey Andrew, this question does not necessarily need to go on the show. However, I seem to remember you mentioning having a hand in designing a buzzbait specifically for smallmouth. Maybe I'm imagining it, but I swear I heard it at one point. After getting a canoe from Santa Claus last Christmas, my 10-year-old son spent the past year learning the joys of catching smallmouth on the river. And whoa. When he got his first one on a buzzbait, he was as hooked as the fish. But the problem is finding a good one to use. On our main river, the bass tend to be on the smaller side, and even though they will hit a large lure, I think if we downsize, we'd get more bites. Any advice? Thanks for what you do, and I really appreciate every bit of information you provide, and doing it in a family-friendly way, so my son and I can listen together while we drive out to the middle of nowhere to bounce around in the boulders looking for smallies. Sincerely, Brett and Holden. Well, hey, Brett, hey, Holden, that's the stuff right there. Like, that's a cool one, because that's what gets me. A father and a son listening to the show, fishing together in a canoe, blasting smallies on the river. That is insanely cool. So thank you both so much for listening to the show. Hopefully you guys are on your way to a good fishing spot right now as you're listening. Now, on to the good stuff, smallies on buzzbaits. And first thing is, no, you didn't make it up, right? I did help design a buzzbait a few years ago, specifically for this exact situation. So that's what's cool about this question. And if you've heard this story before, I apologize. I'll keep it short, but the Cliffs Notes version of it is I grew up throwing like a little Strike King Mini Pro Buzz, or maybe even the Booyah Pond Magic buzz baits, those really small downsized ones for smallmouth because of their size. And then over the years, I really started ripping the skirts off of those buzz baits and instead threading on like a little 3-inch Mr. Twister on the back, and we would absolutely wear fish out on that little rig, and I called it the Buzz Grub. Now, the problem back in those days was those two little buzz baits that they made were kind of trash, right? It was really weak wire, weak hooks, an unnecessary skirt. My plastics keep falling down. So I waited and waited for a company to make a better micro buzz bait. And at the time, nobody did. So I approached my buddy who owns a lure company here in Ohio called Jigmasters, and I asked if he would basically help my design of a dream micro buzz bait kind of come to life, and he did. So we called it the Micro Buzz from Jigmasters. They're available still to purchase over at jigmasters.com. They come in one size, 3/16 ounce, the only size you need. They come in two colors, black and silver, and then they have a custom head design on them that helps that bait lift. They use really heavy wire. I think it's 45 thou that we use on those. They're durable as all get out. They have an extra loop and protection inside the head that you can't see. So basically that hook cannot fail you and it cannot pull apart. No skirt. It's got a screw lock bait keeper so your plastics last a long, long time. It's just the absolute perfect downsized bait for something like smallmouth in the river, right? Because you want the right size and the right profile, but you don't want to sacrifice durability and quality and all that type of thing. And unfortunately, those two things often are on like a teeter-totter, right? You get one versus the other. You get a really small, cool, downsized bait, but then you lose durability or you lose quality. We made sure that we really wanted to do both of those. So those are available over on jigmasters.com. Shameless plug, I guess, but they're only $4.99 each, all day, every day. You just go over there, you click shop, and you scroll down and click Tackle Talks Picks, and then click the Micro Buzz. Now, they do have a light wire version that they made maybe like a month ago just to try out. And if you're going for like smaller panfish or crappie or something, that's cool. But those were just kind of like a small limited run thing. I recommend getting the regular version. So go under Tackle Talks Picks and just click the Micro Buzz. Make sure it's not the light wire version. And that thing is a beast. It is hands down my favorite finesse buzzbait for smallmouth of all time. No questions asked. I really, truly believe you are not going to find a better little smallmouth buzzbait than that thing. All of my friends from all over the country have been lucky enough to kind of meet and make friends throughout this whole podcast journey. I've sent them one or two of these just to be like, hey, give this thing a try and honestly let me know what you think about this, because we've worked pretty hard on this, and I really think, depending on who it is and where they live, I think you're going to have a blast on this thing. And almost every one of them writes back, and it basically just says something like, dude, this thing is awesome. How did I not know about this? So yeah, if you're listening, if you're anywhere where you want a downsized buzzbait, the Micro Buzz is a stone cold killer. Now, what I throw it on, I'll throw it on like spinning gear. That's my favorite way to throw it. I know some guys that will throw like, BFS gear or really light casting gear. I'm here for the spinning rod, because on a spinning rod, that sucker will bomb. And then the fight of smallies on a spinning rod is so much more fun. That's my go-to. But yeah, I think you're right. There are situations where that downsized bait really helps, especially if you're in a high pressure area where they're seeing all these big 3/8 ounce buzz baits, big clacking buzz baits, and they just have got used to that. This is something that they haven't really seen before. The small profile, no skirt, put a little Mr. Twister or a little curly tail grub on the back of it and just reel it ever so slowly, right? Slowly enough that it almost sort of wakes in the water, but fast enough, obviously, that you can keep it up. You can only reel a buzzbait so slow, obviously. But because of the light size of this thing, you can reel it a little slower than most other buzzbaits. So I hope that helps. If you want to go check them out, they're available on the Jigmasters website. I don't make them, right? They're not my thing. It's just my buddy that owns a great company that really helped me kind of bring these things to life. And I hope you guys have some good memories on it like I have. All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first, we are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium batteries. You guys know when I'm out on the water, they are the batteries that I trust for everything that I could need juice for while I'm fishing. Whether it's my kayak motor, whether it's a trolling motor, whether it's my electronics, all of those are powered by Dakota Lithium batteries. I have never had a Dakota Lithium battery fail me out on the water, and it is so nice just to have the peace of mind of knowing that's one thing you can buy the best and you never have to worry about. That's because Dakota Lithium batteries are twice the power of traditional batteries at half the weight. They charge up to 5 times faster. They last up to 4 times longer. They have 100% US-based customer support. Heaven forbid you ever need anything. And they come with an 11-year warranty standard. And that is something that you're not going to get with those cheapo batteries that you're going to find on Amazon or the depths of the internet. A company that stands behind their product, US support to help you if you ever have an issue, and an 11-year warranty protecting your investment. That's why I and so many other anglers out there trust Dakota Lithium. And you can save some money too by using code TackleTalk5 at checkout on DakotaLithium.com. That lets them know that we sent you. That also saves you 5% on your entire battery purchase. Again, code TackleTalk5, that's TackleTalk the number 5, over at www.dakotalithium.com, the official lithium battery of Bassmaster. Okay, the next question here is from Taylor, and he says, "Hey Andrew, I've been listening to Tackle Talk since the beginning. I've always loved fishing, but never seriously until following the podcast. My love for the sport has grown through the past 4 years so much that I've had the unbelievable opportunity to work with a local company, Hamilton Bait and Tackle. It's a great family-owned business where the focal point is on customer service. I've got to know some of your buddies from buying baits from us. I appreciate all that you do and the knowledge and info you bring to us anglers. Now for the question, I know that you've been fishing the KGB resin Chad Shad quite often. Is there a certain color pattern that you've noticed works better than others here in the Midwest, and what style of retrieve is your go-to? Thanks, Taylor." Well, hey, Taylor, thanks for writing in. I appreciate it. And yeah, you must be pretty close to me because Hamilton Bait and Tackle is probably, I don't know, something like 45 minutes from my house. So I did get the chance to meet the guys that own Hamilton Bait and Tackle, I think, at the Columbus Expo, maybe last year. They seem like great dudes. Always great to have more local tackle shops around us that stock a ton of like what we specifically throw around here. So hats off to them. Good on you all. Tell everybody over there that I said hey. But you asked specifically about the KGB resin Chad Shad. And yeah, it's currently my favorite mid-sized glide bait that I own. And I own a lot of others. I own Tatos and Taxi Shads and the Spro Chad Shad. And besides the Chad, I'd say my second favorite is probably the Clutch Eco, but that's a little smaller of a bait. That's kind of in a different category. I think the Eco is just over 6 inches. The Chad Shad, I think, is right at 7. So that makes a big difference when you go, a 6-inch glide bait to a 7-inch glide bait, and then you go up from there 8 and 9, and it starts to get crazy. But I will say there's a big difference between the resin Chad Shads from KGB swim baits and the mass-produced versions of the Chad Shad from Spro. Big difference. The Spro is much heavier. It's obviously plastic with like some metal weighting in the belly. It does have a nice weighting system where it almost guarantees that that thing never rests on its side. And even if you start to get tangled or something, it basically immediately goes straight back up. But they're just two different baits. But with the resin Chad Shad, I really don't have a favorite color. And I'm going to spit something right now that I think is probably a little bit of a hot take, but I don't think color for big glide baits matters almost at all. I could fish right beside my buddy and I could be throwing the most natural shad pattern you've ever seen, and he's over there throwing a bright chartreuse and pink throwback Metro Glide and pink lemonade color, right? And the results are pretty much the same. Now, set aside the fact that fish may or may not even be able to see some of the differences between those two crazy colors because maybe the pink and chartreuse just looks more to them like white and then a little bit of dark gray on it, but it's a whole different conversation based on what fish can see see and the cones in their eyes and all that kind of stuff. But it seems to me like the size, the profile, the movement, the cadence, and the casting placement are much more important than the color itself. I mean, I caught my biggest smallmouth that I've ever caught in my entire life on a crazy looking like moon pie pattern shad. And that thing looks like it's like burnt orange and yellow, really weird looking bait, but it works just as well as my normal, like really ultra realistic gizzard shad patterns. So I don't know. Sometimes I think in general, we overthink color choice, but especially with big glide baits, I don't think it matters to the fish as much as it matters to us. And I actually think you're probably better off picking a bright color that you can see in the water and work correctly. I think that's a really big, important thing with glide baits. You need to be able to see it because you need to be able to know when to pause, when to twitch, what cadence is working, and making sure that it's walking back and forth correctly. That's why you see a lot of guys put a big bright color on top of that bait as what they call, I think, a tracer, which is basically so that you can see it from farther away better in the water. So yeah, I don't really worry too much about what color works best for the fish because the fish don't really seem to care. It's much more about the angler, I think, in my mind. And then as far as the motion goes, I really treat that almost like a jerkbait, right? Conditions and the fish themselves are going to tell you at what cadence you need to be working that glide bait. Now, in the wintertime, you probably have to slow down. You have to let those fish get a look at it. You've got to really give them a chance to kind of mosey to it, where maybe in late summer and in the fall when they're going bananas, you're just working that thing like crazy and bam, 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 and you're almost burning it on top of the water sometimes, and you're working it so fast. So the other thing you got to remember about a glide bait a lot of times is the faster you work it, the higher it will come up in the water column, especially on like a slow sink glide bait. So then there's the other part of this equation that's, okay, what depth are you trying to work that bait at? And then that determines how fast or how slow I'm twitching that bait. Now, you can also make the argument, hey, Andrew, if you want to work it faster at a lower depth, well, then you need to put weight on it. Correct. That's also a thing. You can put like lead wire around the hooks. You can do suspend strips. There's all kinds of stuff there. You can try and weight that a little bit more so it'll stay down while you're working it faster. But at the end of the day, I'm really letting the fish and the conditions tell me how I'm working that bait, not going out there and saying, hey, there's a perfect cadence for this where you're humming like Staying Alive in your head or something, and that's what you're supposed to work in. It's different every day, every situation, different fisheries, different seasons, different barometric pressure for the day and cloud cover and all that kind of stuff. That can all determine how active or inactive, I guess, those fish are and how likely they are to chase a faster glide bait versus really need that thing to kind of be milked right by that lay down or that rock wall or whatever you're trying to work with that glide bait. Okay, the next question here is from Kyle, and he says, hey, Andrew, my name is Kyle. I listen to your podcast all the time on the way to work and during work. Best podcast around by far. Great work. Now, on to my question. I recently bought a Hobie PA14 thanks to listening to your podcast. I also purchased a Garmin Echo Map 63 SV. I heard that everything on side imaging is historical data. Let's just say that I see a nice brush pile on side imaging. If it's historical data, how would I know exactly where that is and how to get back to that same area accurately? Also, if down imaging is also historical data, what if I anchor my kayak and sit there? Eventually, will it pick up fish as they pass beneath, hypothetically? I'm not sure how fast this stuff refreshes. Sorry for the complicated, messy question. I think other people could benefit from hearing the answers too. Thanks a ton, Andrew. Kyle. Ooh, this is a good one, man. So side imaging, let's back up. Let's start with down imaging. So down imaging, yes, theoretically, because you're looking right below your kayak, if, some big school of fish or something goes under your kayak, you should see it. Now, is it going to be like looking at live scope or mega live or, active target or any of those things? No, because like you said, it's historical data. It's not completely live. So there might be a delay on that for sure. But you're talking about things that people have been doing forever. There have been people that have been moping or Demiki rigging or doing whatever for as long as 2D sonar has been around. Watch some of the old like Bassmaster tapes and stuff like that. There are guys out there doing what guys do now with forward-facing sonar with 2D, where they're basically working these fish vertically so that you can see them on the 2D sonar. So yes, that is a possibility. Maybe not the most efficient way to fish nowadays, especially with the kind of modern technology we have out there, but theoretically, yes, you can do that. Now, on to the question that I think is probably a really good question that most people can benefit from is your question on side imaging. So side imaging is one of those things that took me quite a while to get truly comfortable with because it's such a unique way of looking at the water below you and beside you. The orientation of the graph, I think, just takes time, but eventually it does become kind of second nature to you. So you raise a really good point, though, about it also being historical data, and you're exactly right. What you're looking at, you don't see anything on side imaging until you've basically gone over it or beside it, and it's now either even with you or past you. And I know exactly what you mean. Okay, if I see a big laydown off to my right on side imaging, that means I probably just passed it. Now, how do I find that laydown again to go back and fish it? And I'll be honest, there are probably better ways to do this with your electronics. So like your mapping and your waypoints and all that kind of stuff. I'm not great with that. I will be 1,000% honest with you. My biggest weakness with my electronics is my mapping and my waypoints. I almost don't even use waypoints at all. I know I should learn that kind of stuff. I just don't do it. I just kind of remember it in my brain. Instead, we fish pretty small water. So it's not like the most important thing on my graphs, but I'm going to give you like my simpleton answer of what I do to remember or to figure out exactly where the things I'm seeing on side imaging are under the water. Again, this is a little bit more like old school version of this to help get you familiar with what you're seeing on side imaging. The absolute best way, I think, to get familiar with your proximity and your bearings about you on side imaging is to go to a place that has something big sticking out of the water. That could be a bridge pylon, that could be a tree, that could be a wall, something big that's both above and below the water. So for me, it was bridges. Bridges have big concrete pillars that go into the water, so I would turn on my side imaging and make a pass with that bridge pylon on my left, and I would watch my screen. Because you can visually see when your kayak starts to pass that pylon above the water, so you know the exact moment that that starts, and then you watch your graph of what's going on below the water and see how they match up. You're probably going to see that your graph is like maybe a second or so behind your eyes, and that's that delay you're talking about. That's that kind of historical data portion of side imaging. So watch the beginning of that pylon as you go past it above the water, and then begin watching where that pylon shows up on your graph below the water, and watch where that pylon is as you continue to move forward, and just sort of mentally match those two things up in your head. Now, turn around and make a pass with that exact same pylon on your right side and do the same thing, and see how what you're seeing above the water relates to what's going on below the water on your graph timing-wise. And if you do stuff like that enough times at different speeds, you'll start to get almost like a second nature feel for what's going on your graph under the water. So pay attention to your distance markers that are on your graph versus the actual distance from your kayak to that bridge column. That's how I learned to get a good feel of where those things are on my side imaging. Make a pass to that bridge pylon when you're like 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet away, and again, just watch what's going on your graph, because you can already see where that pylon starts and stops above the water. It's just a great marker to kind of get your bearings about you, about the timing of that side imaging. And it just takes practice, but eventually, like I said, it becomes second nature. But yes, you are correct. Everything you're looking at on side imaging is historical data. It's just a matter of getting familiar with it enough to try and figure out where that thing you just saw is. That's practice. That's finding something above the water and really helping train your brain about where that thing is that you're seeing on your graph. So I hope that helps. I know it's not a perfect description. Someone else out there that's a lot more electronic savvy can probably help you, but that's kind of how I attack those things. Okay, the next question here is from Adam, and he says, Mr. Hayes, thanks for producing such a polished and entertaining podcast. I've particularly enjoyed the science-themed episodes and the episode with Drew Gregory. My question is for the mailbag. When, if ever, will you throw a lure that is heavier than the max rating for the rod that you're using? I'm particularly interested in heavier walking baits. Your episode on the 5 essential rods suggests that using a medium for walking baits, including spooks, is your go-to. I've often come across similar recommendations elsewhere, but many medium casting rods are only rated to 1/2 or 5/8 of an ounce, which is lighter than many walking baits, including Zara spooks, which are 3/4 of an ounce, and super spooks, which are 7/8 of an ounce. I want to keep my rod numbers low because I fish on foot or from the kayak often, because I'm cheap, and because I would like to stay married. Thanks again, Adam from Cleveland. Hey, Adam, good question. And this is one that I think I have a pretty simple answer for. Yes, you can throw bigger spooks on a medium than what it's rated for, and that is still my preference. The lure rating is important. I'm not going to say that it's not important, but it's not the end-all be-all on what a rod can handle. Because typically, unless we're talking like really big baits like glides or musky baits or something like that, I pay more attention to the minimum rating of that rod than I do the maximum rating of that rod. The minimum rating gives me an idea of what lures are just going to be too light to comfortably throw on that rod, which then leads to terrible casting distance. It leads to bird nests. It leads to bad casting performance in the wind, all those kinds of issues. And yes, there is some merit to obviously having a top rating of your rod. You don't want to throw, a 2-ounce glide bait on a rod that maxes out at 5/8 of an ounce because you might snap that rod in your back cast, especially if you're not careful. But for spooks, a super spook is not going to break your medium rod on the cast if you're casting like a normal, sane human being. Now, if you're whipping it around like a moron, anything can happen with that rod, obviously. But in general, I've casted super spooks and Zara spooks on mediums almost my whole life that I've been fishing spooks. And if your medium rod cannot handle a Zara spook or a super spook, you're buying the wrong brand of rod. So aside from the initial cast, which obviously doesn't take a lot of stress on that rod because your lure is heavy enough and you're probably using relatively light line, braid, or mono, especially if you're only fishing topwater stuff on this rod, that bait is going to fly without a lot of stress on that rod during the cast. And then during the retrieve, you're not putting a lot of stress on that rod either because you're working that spook on slack line. So to me, in this situation, you can ignore the max rating at least to an extent. Now, again, I wouldn't go throwing an 8-inch resin swim bait on it, but for regular spooks, you're fine with a medium. And you might find people that would say, well, then, Andrew, just go up to a medium heavy for spooks and take the worry out of it. Well, one, I like lighter rods when I'm working a spook because it feels more comfortable. You got that rod tip pointed down. You're putting a lot of action in the wrist. I like that lighter rod. But then two, you yourself said you're trying to reduce your number of rods, not expand them. And I want that spook rod to handle both smaller spooks like a Boyo or a Zara Puppy, and then also bigger spooks like the Zara Spook and the Super Spook. And given the choice, I'd rather throw a bigger spook on a medium than a smaller spook on a medium heavy all day, every day. Okay, and the last question here is from Nash, and he says, "Hey Andrew, I'm Nash. I'm 11 years old. I'm an avid angler in central Pennsylvania. I have a huge question that I've been wondering for weeks but haven't had time to write in. Okay, my question is, are you going to the Great American Outdoor Show in Dauphin County in Pennsylvania, February 3rd through 11th? I would love to get to meet you there because I'm not going to be able to go to ICAST or the Cincinnati Fishing Expo. Sorry for the long question. I really hope I can meet you in 2025. Thanks so much for the podcast, Nash." Hey Nash, thanks for listening, man. Appreciate it. Unfortunately, no, I won't be able to go to the Great American Outdoor Show in February, but I am planning, at least right now, on being at the Columbus Fishing Expo, which is that same week. I think the Columbus Fishing Expo this year is February 7th through 9th, and that's the plan right now, is being at the Columbus Expo all 3 days, hanging out, some cool merch stuff, seminars, the whole deal that we normally do at the Columbus Fishing Expo. But that means that I obviously won't be able to be over in Pennsylvania at that same time. But mark your calendars, because if all goes right, we will be at the Columbus Expo for 3 whole days. I'm just waiting on one final scheduling thing to kind of clear up, and we'll be A-okay. But 2025 may be a pretty crazy year in general for us here at Tackle Talk, just in terms of scheduling. Nothing will change for you all. The show doesn't get affected. Upload times will not be affected. You guys won't really notice anything. But just for me and my side of things here, some possible opportunities or things that might be happening in 2025 might make scheduling a little bit tough, so some in-person stuff might not be quite so possible next year as it normally is other years. But right now, yes, we are planning on being at the Columbus Fishing Expo February 7th through 9th, and I should be able to confirm that hopefully in the next week or two here on the show. All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. Appreciate each and every one of you. As always, go find us on Instagram, Facebook at Tackle Talk Podcast. Find us on the web, tackletalkpodcast.com. Shoot us an email, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2021. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.